If you want to join us for Thanksgiving, you can come early and wash the dishes. That's what my daughter-in-law barked over the phone. I simply replied, enjoy. Later, when she saw photos of my gorgeous villa in Switzerland, my phone lit up, 71 missed calls. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The call came at exactly 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time so clearly because I was halfway through my favorite cooking show, the one where they build towering desserts I'd never dare attempt. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the calm of my afternoon. Hello, Mabel. Marin's voice was clipped and emotionless. No greeting, no warmth, just my name, as if it tasted sour. Oh, hi sweetheart, I said, muting the TV and straightening up in my old armchair. How are you? How's David? She didn't answer. She never did. Instead, she launched into what I now see was a carefully rehearsed act of humiliation. I'm calling about Thanksgiving, she began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. If you want to come, show up early to do the dishes. Cooking and serving will be handled by people who actually know what they're doing. The words hit me like a slap. My chest tightened, and a familiar ache spread through my ribs. I couldn't breathe for a moment. People who actually know what they're doing. As if 37 years of cooking for my late husband and son didn't count. As if the hundreds of meals I'd made from scratch, full of love and effort, had been meaningless. I see, I managed to whisper. Good. Be there at noon sharp. Dinner's at 4, that'll give you time to clean up after. There was a brief silence, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Oh, and Mabel? Don't bring anything. We've got it all covered. Then, click. She hung up. No goodbye. No thanks. Just silence. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty dial tone as if it might rewind the last 5 minutes. My hands trembled as I set it down. I looked at the black TV screen and caught my reflection, a 64-year-old woman with streaks of gray in her pulled-back hair, wearing a sweater worn thin at the elbows. When had I become so invisible? So disposable? The memories came flooding in, like they always did when Marin reminded me of my place in their perfect, polished lives. It wasn't always like this. When David was little and it was just the two of us after his father passed, we were a team. He'd help me set the table while I cooked dinner, and we'd talk about his dreams, his fears, his school day. Then came Marin. I still remember the first time he brought her home. She was 25, 5 years younger than David. Perfect blonde curls, designer clothes that probably cost more than my rent. She walked through my modest apartment like she was walking through a thrift store, politely disgusted. It's quaint, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Very vintage chic. David laughed. He thought it was a compliment. I knew better. The changes started gradually. David began skipping my dinners. Marin prefers eating out. The phone calls grew less frequent. Marin says I need to be more independent. When they got engaged, no one asked me to help with the wedding. It's easier if my mom handles everything, Marin had said, like it was a perfectly reasonable decision. I should have spoken up. I should have claimed my place. But I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the bitter one, the troublemaker. So I pulled back. I made myself smaller. I thought if I was quiet and respectful, maybe they'd appreciate me. They never did. After they married, I became a formality. A chore on their guest list. I'd bring homemade dishes that sat untouched while everyone fawned over Marin's catering. I'd offer to help, only to be brushed aside. We've got it covered. I'd try to have a moment with David, but Marin always redirected the conversation, always shut down anything that tied him to his past, to me. But the worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was watching my son let it happen. David, my little boy who used to hide under my covers during thunderstorms, who begged for one more bedtime story, now sat silently while his wife treated me like the help. I walked to my tiny kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. It was a habit that had gotten me through many hard moments. As I waited for the water to boil, I caught my reflection in the window. When did I start looking so tired? So defeated? When did my shoulders start curling inward, like I was trying to shrink out of sight? The apartment I lived in was a quiet reminder of how much my life had shrunk over the years. Just one bedroom, one bathroom, and a small living area that doubled as my dining room and living room. The furniture, though clean, bore the wear and tear of decades, each piece picked up from second-hand stores or neighborhood sales. The walls were mostly bare, save for a few framed photos of David as a boy. Maren never asked about them. Never cared. I'd been living in that apartment for 8 years, ever since I could no longer afford the modest home where I'd raised David. The rent here fit within my limited pension, and I used to tell myself it was cozy, not cramped. But today, as thoughts of Maren's sparkling house with its granite counters and expensive appliances filled my mind, the weight of what I'd lost felt unbearable. The kettle whistled, jarring me from my spiral. I poured hot water over a basic tea bag, the store brand, because the good stuff was too pricey, and then, almost on instinct, I reached for the phone. I dialed David. He answered after a few rings. "Mom?" He sounded surprised. I rarely called him directly anymore. Maren preferred to manage our communication. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, steadying my voice. "I just wanted to let you know. I won't be coming for Thanksgiving this year." A pause. Long enough for the words to sink in. "What? Why not?" "I think it's better if you and Maren spend the day with her family. There's no need to complicate things." "Mom, come on, don't be like that. Of course you're coming." "Wait, did Maren call you?" The way he said it said everything. He knew. He'd probably been sitting right next to her when she made that cold little call, inviting me over only to scrub dishes. She did. And I've made other plans. What other plans? His voice tightened, as though my decision was somehow inconvenient. Like it didn't fit the version of me he preferred, quiet, passive, available. I looked around at my quiet apartment. The loneliness that had once felt like routine now pressed in like a judgment. "I'm doing something for myself this year," I said softly. "Have a lovely Thanksgiving, David." I hung up before he could speak, before I lost my nerve. For the first time in years, I'd drawn a line. It was both terrifying and freeing. I sipped my tea as the sky outside darkened, unaware that the choice I'd just made would set off a chain of events I couldn't have predicted, that a single letter arriving the next morning would change everything. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and expensive-looking. My name was handwritten in delicate script. I almost tossed it, assuming it was another charity appeal, but something about the paper made me pause. The return address caught my eye. Hayes and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Hartford, Connecticut. My hands trembled as I opened it. No one ever sends good news through a law firm. Dear Mrs. Eleanor Mabel Prescott. We regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore Ashford, who died peacefully at her estate on October 15. As per her final will and testament, you have been named as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange the transfer of assets. I read it 3 times before the words even started to register. Cordelia Whitmore Ashford. That name pulled me back 45 years, back to a version of myself I thought I'd left behind. Eleanor Cordelia Fairchild. That was me, once. Before I became Mabel Prescott. Before I chose love over a lifetime of luxury. At 19, fresh out of finishing school, I was the heir to the Fairchild textile fortune. Our family owned mills across New England. The Fairchild name opened doors, elegant, heavy ones. But I'd never been interested in marrying within that world. While my friends courted trust fund heirs and young executives, I fell head over heels for Tommy Prescott, a mechanic with calloused hands and the kindest smile I'd ever seen. He worked at the garage where I'd taken my car, and somehow, He saw me for who I was, not for the name, not for the money. When I told my parents I intended to marry him, they were scandalized. My father threatened to disown me. My mother wept for weeks. The family lawyer carefully explained what I was giving up. The Fairchild Trust required family approval. If I married outside our social circle, I wouldn't just lose my inheritance, I'd lose everything. But I didn't care. I was young. In love. Certain that love could weather anything. The day after our small ceremony, just Tommy's family and a few friends, a letter arrived from the same law firm that had just contacted me again 45 years later. It informed me that I was no longer Fairchild. My trust was dissolved. My name erased from their ledgers. But I never regretted it. Tommy and I had 30 beautiful years together. We didn't have much, his salary as a mechanic and later his modest pension barely covered the basics. But we had happiness. We raised David in a house filled with warmth and stories, even if it lacked chandeliers and summer homes. When Tommy passed away, cancer took more than just the love of my life, it also took my financial stability. I had to sell our home. David was already married to Maren by then, building a life that barely had room for me. And through all of it, I never told him. Never told him that I'd once walked away from a fortune, from legacy, for the sake of love. I didn't want him to feel guilty about our life. Or worse, resentful that I'd chosen hardship over privilege. But now, sitting in my little kitchen, holding this letter in my shaking hands, I wondered if that had been a mistake. I picked up the phone and called the number listed. The receptionist transferred me immediately. Mrs. Prescott, a warm, polished voice greeted me. Or perhaps I should say, Miss Fairchild. My breath caught in my throat. Cordelia spoke of you often, the man said gently. She never forgot you. My voice came out in a hushed murmur. Oh, well. Yes, Mr. Petton said gently. She followed your life with great care. When she found out you'd chosen love over wealth, she said you were the most courageous woman she'd ever known. He paused, then added, Cordelia never married, you know. Said no man was worth trading her independence for. Cordelia, my closest friend from our finishing school days. We'd lost touch after I married Tommy, but it turns out she hadn't forgotten me the way I thought I'd been forgotten. The inheritance is quite significant, Mr. Petton went on. There's a villa in Switzerland, along with all its contents, and a trust to cover its upkeep. Cordelia believed someone who once gave up everything for love deserved to spend her later years in peace and comfort. I couldn't respond. My vision blurred. The walls of my little kitchen felt like they were shifting around me. Mrs. Prescott? Are you all right? I'm here, I whispered. I can't believe this is really happening. It is, he said. Cordelia left very clear wishes. The villa has been meticulously cared for, awaiting your arrival. Shall we arrange a visit? 20 minutes later, I hung up with a folder full of details about a home I now owned in a country I'd never set foot in. It was nestled near Lake Geneva, with sweeping views of the Alps. Cordelia's private hideaway. Filled with antiques, fine art, and furniture collected over a lifetime. The trust fund tied to it would give me more income than I'd seen in decades. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the photos Mr. Petton had emailed. On my old, sluggish laptop screen, the villa looked like something out of a dream. Ivy climbed across weathered stone walls. Tall windows opened onto flower-covered terraces. The rooms inside were warm, classic, filled with beauty. Each piece of furniture probably cost more than everything I owned combined. For the first time since Tommy passed, I felt something stir inside me, something unfamiliar. Hope. But right on its heels came fear. What did I know about life in Switzerland? About owning property? Managing a trust? How was I, a woman used to discount groceries and thrift store couches, supposed to belong in a place like that? Just then, my phone rang. David. I sighed and answered. Mom, what was all that yesterday? Maren's upset you hung up on her. I didn't hang up, I said calmly. I simply let you both know I had other plans. What plans? You never have plans. His words cut. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. When had I become the kind of person who never had plans? Who lived so quietly, so invisibly, that her absence wouldn't leave a dent? Maybe it's time I started making some, I said, my voice stronger now. Mom, don't be dramatic. Just come to Thanksgiving. Maren didn't mean anything by what she said. I looked again at the photos on my screen, at the life Cordelia had left behind for me. A life that reminded me of who I used to be, before I made myself small enough to fit inside everyone else's expectations. Actually, David, I said, I think I might be out of town for Thanksgiving. Out of town? Where are you going? His voice carried that old disbelief. The patronizing edge I'd come to expect. I'm thinking. Europe, I said. Switzerland, to be exact. Silence. Mom, are you okay? Did something happen? Did you hit your head? I laughed, really laughed, and it felt so good, so startling, I almost didn't recognize the sound. No, darling. I think I'm finally not hitting my head against the same old wall anymore. After we hung up, I called Mr. Peton back. I'd like to see the villa, I told him. Can we arrange for me to fly out next week? Absolutely, he said warmly. Cordelia would be thrilled. Planning the trip. My first real trip since my honeymoon nearly 45 years ago, I felt something else rise within me. Excitement. David and Maren had no idea what they'd triggered. They thought they were keeping me in my place, reminding me that I was the grateful poor relation, content with leftovers and silence. But all they'd really done was wake up a part of me I'd buried. The part that once chose love over money. The part that knew how to be brave. Maybe it was time to be that woman again. The plane landed in Geneva on a crisp Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Maren's humiliating phone call. I pressed my forehead against the window, watching the snow-capped Alps rise through the clouds like something conjured from a painting. My heart thudded, not from fear of flying, which I'd managed better than expected, but from the enormity of what was ahead. Everything had been arranged. Just as promised. At the arrival's gate, a man stood holding a sign with my name, my real name. Written in graceful cursive, Eleanor Fairchild. He introduced himself as Klaus, my driver. Middle-aged, polite, well-dressed. His English was near perfect, laced with that elegant Swiss accent that made every word feel like part of a poem. Welcome to Switzerland, Madame Fairchild, Klaus said warmly, taking my one worn-out suitcase with care. Mrs. Ashford often spoke of you. She looked forward to this moment very much. As we drove through the rolling countryside, Klaus told me about Cordelia's final years. She lived quietly here at the villa, he said. She spent her time in the gardens, reading everything she could get her hands on. She never married, never had children, but she maintained friendships all over the globe. Letters came and went constantly. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. About 2 months ago, she received a letter from someone in your hometown. After reading it, she called her lawyers immediately and made sure everything was prepared for you. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Someone from my town? Yes, Klaus nodded. A woman who knew your family. She spotted you at the market and recognized you from old society pages. She wrote to Mrs. Ashford to share how difficult your circumstances seemed to be. I shut my eyes, heat rising to my face. The idea of someone writing to Cordelia about poor Mabel Prescott, the once glamorous girl now living in a cramped apartment, cutting coupons, wearing clothes decades past their prime, made my skin crawl. Klaus must have sensed my shame. It wasn't pity she felt, he said gently. She was furious. She said it was a disgrace that someone who had given up everything for love should spend her later years in hardship. We turned through a pair of iron gates, and my breath caught. The villa stood before us like something out of a fairy tale, 3 stories of golden stone wrapped in ivy, tall windows glowing in the afternoon light. Gardens stretched as far as I could see, filled with late-season roses and perfectly shaped hedges. In the distance, Lake Geneva shimmered like glass scattered with diamonds. "Oh my," I whispered. Klaus smiled. "Mrs. Ashford always said it was waiting for the right soul to truly appreciate it." He pulled the car to a stop at the main entrance, where an older woman stood on the steps, dressed neatly in gray. "This is Mrs. Hoffman," Klaus said. "She's been looking after the villa for 15 years. Madam Fairchild," she greeted me, giving a graceful curtsy that made me feel both awkward and oddly noble. "Welcome home." Home. The word landed in my chest with unexpected force. She led me through the front door, and I gasped. Inside, the villa was breathtaking. High ceilings adorned with carved molding, walls covered in silk wallpaper, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Each room was more elegant than the last, a library with soaring bookshelves, a music room with a grand piano, a dining room fit for royalty. "Mrs. Ashford made it clear," Mrs. Hoffman said as we ascended the wide staircase to the second floor. "Nothing is to be changed. She said you'd know what to do with it all." She opened the doors to what had clearly been the master suite. The room was enormous. French doors opened onto a private balcony with a sweeping view of the lake. The bed was a four-poster antique, dressed in linens that looked far too fine for someone like me. But it was the desk by the window that made me freeze. On its polished surface sat a framed photo I hadn't seen in 45 years, Cordelia and me, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, laughing like fools during our finishing school days. Next to it was a sealed envelope with my name in Cordelia's handwriting. "She wanted you to have this," Mrs. Hoffman said quietly. "I'll leave you alone to read it." When she left, I sank into the chair with trembling hands and carefully opened the envelope. "My dearest Eleanor. If you're reading this, then you've finally come home, not just to this villa, but to yourself." Tears blurred the page. I never forgot the girl who chose love over privilege. Who walked away from everything familiar because her heart told her to. "You were the bravest of us all, even if the world didn't always reward that courage the way it should have. I followed your life as best I could. Yes, I had someone keeping tabs. Don't be too shocked. I knew about your happy years, your son, your husband's passing. I knew when you had to sell your home, when you moved into that tiny flat. I even knew about your daughter-in-law and how she treated you, and that broke my heart. You gave up a fortune for love. And you raised a son who, I'm afraid, doesn't seem to grasp the worth of either love or loyalty. But his failure is not yours. This villa has been waiting for you, Eleanor. I kept it just as you see it now because I believed that one day you would need a place to remember who you really are, not Mabel the burden, or Mabel the forgotten, but Eleanor Fairchild, the woman who had the strength to live by her own truth. The trust will provide you with a monthly income of $15,000, enough for you to live fully and freely. Mrs. Hoffman will help you manage everything. Klaus will take you wherever you need to go. You've spent too many years shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. That ends now. You're 64 years old, my beloved friend. You still have decades ahead of you, good years. Don't waste a second of them. Be extraordinary instead. With all my love. Cordelia. P.S. I've left you my camera collection. Remember how you loved photography back in school? Maybe it's time to rediscover that part of yourself. I sat at that beautiful desk as the sun dipped behind the Alps and cast a golden hue over Lake Geneva. And I cried, deeply, freely, harder than I had since Tommy passed. But these weren't tears of sorrow or regret. They were tears of recognition. Of finding myself again after so many years lost in the wilderness of duty and survival. A soft knock broke the silence. Mrs. Hoffman stepped in with a tray of tea balanced perfectly on silver. "There's soup warming in the kitchen," she said kindly. "And Klaus has brought your luggage upstairs. Would you like me to unpack for you?" "Yes, please," I replied, surprised by how naturally the words came. I laughed a little. When had anyone last offered to help me? That first night, I lay in a vast bed, wrapped in luxury and silence. There were no honking cars, no late-night arguments through paper-thin walls, no echo of distant sirens, only stillness. Peaceful, sacred quiet. I thought of David and Marin. They were likely baffled, whispering to each other about what had come over their sensible mother. But they didn't realize it was their own unkindness that had unlocked a door I'd closed nearly half a century ago. And for the first time since losing Tommy, I fell asleep hopeful. Hopeful about tomorrow. The next morning, Mrs. Hoffman gave me a full tour of the villa, the wine cellar lined with rare vintages, the conservatory bursting with tropical blooms, and finally, the artist's studio on the third floor with north-facing windows that captured the morning light just right. There, in glass cabinets like pieces of art, was Cordelia's camera collection. Dozens of them, vintage and modern, each polished and pristine. Mrs. Ashford said you had a gift for photography when you were younger, Mrs. Hoffman said gently. She hoped you might find that joy again. I reached for a sleek digital model. Despite the decades, it felt natural in my hands, like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Through the windows, the Alps rolled endlessly into the sky, begging to be remembered. Mrs. Hoffman, I asked, do you think Klaus could drive me into town this afternoon? I don't exactly have the right clothes for this life. She smiled knowingly. Of course, madam. Though perhaps you should take a look in the closet first. In the walk-in wardrobe attached to the master suite, I found a full collection, dresses, slacks, cashmere sweaters, scarves, and jewelry, all perfectly tailored in my size. Every piece was classic, refined, and clearly chosen with care. How did she know my size? I asked, running my fingers along a stunning wool coat. She received your measurements from the woman who wrote to her, Mrs. Hoffman said simply. Cordelia wanted you to have everything you'd need to step into this new life without hesitation. I changed out of my old discount store clothes into a soft cashmere sweater and well-fitted wool trousers. When I glanced at the mirror, I hardly recognized myself, yet it was unmistakably me. Shoulders back. Chin up. Elegant. Present. Eleanor Fairchild. Later that day, Klaus drove me through the nearby village. I opened a Swiss bank account and learned what $15,000 a month could do. The banker, a dignified man with kind eyes, told me the trust Cordelia had arranged would provide for me for the rest of my life. Mrs. Ashford made it clear, he said, you are never to go without again. On the way home, I asked Klaus to stop at a lakeside cafe. I ordered a proper espresso and a fresh pastry, not the boxed cookies I used to ration back in my apartment. I took out one of Cordelia's cameras. The light was exquisite, turning the town gold. I snapped photos of the lake, the medieval rooftops, the swans drifting peacefully, and with each click, something inside me reignited. A part of myself long buried started breathing again. That evening, reviewing the images, I was surprised at how strong they were. My instinct for composition hadn't disappeared, it had simply been waiting. I sat at the writing desk and logged into my long-forgotten Facebook account, the one David had helped me set up years ago. I selected my favorite photo from the day, the lake at sunset, the Alps mirrored in its still surface. I captioned it simply. New adventures begin with a single step. No explanations. No updates. Just beauty. A moment. Within an hour, the post had more likes and comments than anything I'd ever shared. Former classmates, extended family, even some of David's friends chimed in, complimenting the photo, asking where it was taken, expressing awe. I smiled, closed the laptop, and answered none of them. For the first time, I felt no need to explain myself to anyone. That night, preparing for bed, I saw myself in the mirror again. The woman standing there wasn't just changed by elegant clothes or her surroundings, she was changed by clarity. She knew her worth. She remembered who she was. Tomorrow, I'd explore more. Take more photos. Maybe start reshaping the villa to feel even more like mine. But tonight, I was simply grateful, for a friend who never forgot me. For a second chance I never imagined. And for the courage to say yes to both. 3 weeks had passed since I arrived, and I was becoming someone I hadn't seen in decades. Each morning, I woke beneath the canopy of the four-poster bed with Lake Geneva glittering just beyond the balcony. For a few moments, I'd lie there in awe, still unsure this life was really mine. Mrs. Hoffman had become more than a housekeeper. She was my companion, my teacher, and in many ways, my gentle reintroduction to a world I'd nearly forgotten existed. She taught me how the villa ran, introduced me to local shopkeepers who'd long served Cordelia, and reminded me, in soft, kind ways, that I no longer had to worry about pennies or prices. "Madam," Mrs. Hoffman said one morning as I hesitated in front of an expensive bottle of wine at the village market, "you must remember, this is your life now. Mrs. Ashford wanted you to enjoy each day, not spend it worrying over every franc." Adjusting wasn't easy. After 45 years of budgeting to the penny, always choosing the store brand, always making things stretch, that mindset doesn't vanish overnight. But slowly, I began to understand what Cordelia meant by living magnificently. I started small, fresh flowers in every room, replaced twice a week. The luxurious face cream I'd always admired in magazines but never dared buy. Real silk scarves, the kind that feel like water against your skin, not the cheap imitations I used to make do with. Each little indulgence felt like a quiet revolution. A rebellion against the life I'd spent decades surviving, not living. Photography came back to me like a song I hadn't heard in years but still remembered every note of. Each day, Klaus drove me to some new breathtaking scene, storybook villages tucked into alpine valleys, crystal clear lakes reflecting snow-dusted peaks, vineyards laid out like patchwork quilts over the hills. I was slowly building a collection, not just of landscapes, but of rediscovered vision. One afternoon, as I reviewed the day's images on my laptop, I selected one in particular, a close-up of frost-kissed grapevines set against the backdrop of the Alps. I posted it to Facebook, as I'd been doing lately, without comment or location, just the image. Let the photo speak for itself. And speak it did. Within minutes, the comments poured in. "Mabel, this is stunning. Where on earth is this? Are you traveling? When did you become such a talented photographer? Is this Switzerland? Wait, how can you afford to be in Switzerland?" That last comment pierced me a little more than I'd expected. I knew it came from honest curiosity, not malice. But still, it struck a nerve. How could Mabel Prescott, the widow from the coupon aisle, the woman who wore the same coat for 5 winters, possibly afford this? I closed the laptop without replying. But the question echoed in my thoughts long after. They didn't know that the woman they thought they knew, the one who quietly endured, was no longer asleep. Eleanor Fairchild had finally awakened. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Mrs. Hoffman knocked gently and stepped inside. "Klaus said you seemed unsettled today," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" Over the past few weeks, I'd grown unexpectedly close to her. Though she was likely a decade younger than me, she had a warm, grounding presence that reminded me of how it felt to be genuinely cared for, something I hadn't felt since Tommy. "I was just thinking about home," I said. "About how people there still see me." She nodded knowingly. "Mrs. Ashford struggled with the same thing, you know, when she first inherited her family's estate. She used to say it was hard to grow into a bigger life when everyone expected her to stay small. What did she do? She decided that managing others' expectations wasn't her job. She believed that shrinking yourself to make others comfortable was a form of self-betrayal." That phrase stuck with me all night, self-betrayal. Was that what I'd been doing all these years? Hiding my light? Downplaying my wants, my dreams, just to avoid making others uncomfortable? The next morning, I made a decision. I reached out to a local photographer I'd been told about, a young woman named Amelie, known for her portrait work. "I'd like some photographs taken," I told her over the phone. Not for any occasion. Just because. She arrived the next day, her energy light and warm. She couldn't have been more than 35. Sharp-eyed, expressive, with a calming presence. As she sat up in the library, she studied me thoughtfully. "You have such striking features," she said. "Your eyes especially, they tell stories." For 2 hours, she photographed me in various spaces and moods. Some formal, in my new wardrobe, seated regally in the parlor. Others candid, reading in the sunlit library, trimming lavender in the garden, standing barefoot on the balcony with Lake Geneva behind me. With every snap of the lens, I felt something shift inside, like I was stepping further into myself. A few days later, Amelie returned with the finished photos. When she showed me the collection, I gasped. The woman in the images, she was luminous. Poised. Joyful. Her silver hair was styled in soft waves. Her skin glowed, not from makeup, but from peace. Her eyes sparkled, not with youth, but with clarity and humor and depth. Is this really me?" I whispered, staring at one where I was laughing mid-conversation. "This is you, exactly as you are," Amelie said gently. "Most people hide from the camera because they've never truly seen themselves. But you let yourself be seen. She said softly, you light up when the camera's on you." That evening, I chose my favorite photo from the session, the one where I was mid-laugh, wearing a soft cream cashmere sweater that brought a gentle glow to my eyes. I looked radiant. Poised. Entirely at ease in my new surroundings. Without overthinking it, I posted the picture on Facebook with a simple caption. "Welcoming this beautiful chapter of life." The response was instant and overwhelming. "Mabel, you look absolutely incredible. I barely recognized you, you look 20 years younger. Where are you? Are you in a castle? Is this really you? You seem like a whole new person." For the first time since arriving in Switzerland, I decided to respond to a few comments. "Thank you for the kind words. I'm learning that life can still be breathtaking. At any age, if you allow yourself to truly live it." But it wasn't the public comments that unsettled me. It was the private messages. Some were from old friends, genuinely joyful to see me flourishing. Others carried a strange, uncomfortable edge, a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and thinly veiled bitterness. "Mabel, I'm confused. Weren't you just living in that tiny apartment? Now you look like you're living some millionaire fantasy. Must be nice to suddenly have all this money. Some of us are still scraping by. I hope you're not caught up in one of those online scams. Things like this are usually too good to be true." I stared at the screen, that old, familiar urge creeping in, the desire to explain, to justify, to shrink myself down again so no one would feel threatened by my good fortune. But then I remembered Mrs. Hoffman's quiet wisdom: shrinking yourself for others is a form of self-betrayal. So I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. The sun was dipping low over Lake Geneva, casting the sky in soft pinks and golds that shimmered like silk. In the distance, the church bells chimed, a sound that had become as soothing as a lullaby. This life was mine now. Not because I'd won the lottery, or married into wealth, or done anything shameful. This was a gift from a dear friend who never forgot who I was and believed I deserved the chance to become that woman again. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't owe an apology for my blessings. And I certainly didn't owe anyone the power to make me feel guilty for finally living fully. In the days that followed, I began to post more regularly. My morning coffee, sipped slowly on the terrace. The fresh bouquets Mrs. Hoffman arranged around the villa. Pages from the books I read curled up in the library. Quiet moments shared with Klaus at charming local cafes. No long captions. No justifications. Just glimpses of a life being truly lived. The reactions kept coming. Many were kind. Others, increasingly sour and skeptical. I began to notice the pattern. The people who were content in their own lives celebrated my happiness. Those who weren't seemed to take it personally. Then one evening, as I reviewed the latest responses, my phone rang. "David." My stomach tightened. I knew this call would come eventually. Mom, he said, his voice strained with the kind of forced patience I'd come to know too well, we need to talk. Hello, David. How are you? I asked, keeping my voice even. I'm confused, honestly. Marin's been showing me your Facebook posts, and we're just trying to understand what's going on. I took a slow breath. What do you mean, exactly? I mean the clothes, the restaurants, the travel. Just last month, you were clipping coupons and living in that shoebox apartment. Now you're posting like you're at some five-star resort. I'm living comfortably, I said, choosing my words with care. Mom, this isn't just comfortable. You look like you hit the jackpot. That place you're in, it looks like it costs more per night than my mortgage. Where are you even staying? I heard Marin's voice in the background, low but urgent. David clearly wasn't alone. She thinks maybe, he hesitated. Maybe you've gotten wrapped up in something. Like an online scam. You know, those ones where people convince older women to send money, or think they're in a relationship. The implication hit harder than I expected. In their eyes, there was no way Mabel Prescott could suddenly have a better life unless she'd been tricked or taken advantage of. Because to them, I was still the struggling, pitted widow, incapable of creating joy for herself. David, I said, my tone sharper than he'd probably ever heard, I am not being scammed. I am not delusional. And I am not your burden to manage. Of course you are. You're my mother. We're just trying to look out for you. You weren't looking out for me when your wife offered me dish duty for Thanksgiving instead of a seat at the table. You didn't seem concerned when I was alone in that cramped apartment, watching every penny just to keep the lights on. There was a long pause. I could still hear Marin in the background, her voice more insistent now. David muttered something to her. Probably telling her to be quiet. Mom, that's not fair. We've always cared about you. Have you? I asked, softly but firmly. Because real care usually looks like checking in, not leaping to conclusions the moment someone's life begins to improve. So tell me, David, when was the last time you actually asked me how I was? He paused. Can you at least tell me how your situation has changed? I glanced around the elegant room that now felt like mine, the rich fabrics, the photographs I'd taken scattered on the writing desk, the view beyond the French windows. I thought of the trust fund Cordelia had arranged that now secured my future. Of the kind strangers who had become real friends in the village. Of the woman who smiled back at me in the mirror each morning, someone I had thought was long gone. I can tell you I'm happier than I've been in decades, I said gently. I'm finally living the life I was meant for. And I'm not asking anything from you. Not your understanding, not your validation, and certainly not your permission. Mom, you're starting to scare us. Good, I replied, surprised by how deeply I meant it. Maybe it's time you worried about losing me, instead of assuming I'll always be waiting for whatever scraps of attention you decide to offer. I ended the call before he could respond. My heart thudded in my chest, a wild mix of fear, freedom, and fierce exhilaration. It felt like I'd just set fire to a bridge I'd spent years trying to cross. But as I looked out at the moonlight casting a silver shimmer across Lake Geneva, I realized something vital. I didn't want that bridge anymore. I wanted to build something new, something honest, something whole, something worthy of the woman I was finally allowing myself to become. The next morning, Mrs. Hoffman arrived with my coffee and a plate of warm pastries. You look lighter today, madam, she said, offering me a kind smile. As if something heavy has been lifted. I raised my cup in a quiet toast. I think it has, I said. I really think it has. That same morning, I woke to 17 missed calls. 17. I stared at the screen in disbelief. 12 from David. 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. 2 from Marin, she'd never called me directly before. My voicemail was completely full. I listened while sipping my coffee from delicate china. David's first message was apologetic. Mom, I'm sorry about how that call ended. Please call me back. Marin and I are just worried. By the fifth message, the tone had shifted. This isn't helping, Mom. You're not answering, and it's starting to feel like you're punishing us. Then, desperation took over. I've been calling all night. Please just let me know you're okay. I'm really scared something's wrong. But it was Marin's voice that cracked with tension. Mabel, I don't know what kind of game this is, but it needs to stop. David's barely slept. You can't just vanish and post these fantasy pictures without explaining yourself. Her second voicemail hinted at something deeper. Look, I know we've had our differences, but David loves you. He's talking about flying to Switzerland. Do you know what that would cost us? Please. Just explain what's happening. I set the phone down and walked to the balcony. The morning mist was retreating from the lake, revealing the snow-dusted Alps like a painting come to life. Somewhere across the ocean, my son and his wife were unraveling over my silence. But for the first time in years, I had slept through the night, deeply, peacefully. Mrs. Hoffman appeared again with a basket of fresh pastries. Hard news from home? She asked gently, reading my face. My son is worried, I said simply. She nodded, understanding. Children often struggle when their parents reclaim their independence. They want you to need them, even if they don't particularly want to help. Her words hit like a truth I hadn't let myself say out loud. David didn't necessarily want to support me, but my dependence gave him the illusion of virtue. My freedom threatened that entire arrangement. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I joined Klaus at the village market. We selected produce and herbs for a cooking lesson with Henri, the part-time chef at the villa. That day, I learned to make croissants from scratch, a dream I'd never had the time, money, or courage to chase before. As I folded the chilled butter into the dough, feeling the texture shift under my fingers, I felt something inside me settle. A quiet joy. A steadiness. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful from the simplest ingredients. Magnifique! Henri exclaimed as the croissants emerged golden, crisp, and perfect. You have a natural touch, madam. I took a photo of the arrangement. The flaky croissants, a porcelain cup of coffee, sunlight spilling onto the marble counter. Through the kitchen window, the lake gleamed in the background. I posted it with a short caption. Learning new skills at any age brings joy. Today's triumph, homemade croissants. The comments rolled in within minutes. But these were different now. Mabel, your son is begging people online to help find you. Are you okay? David says you're ignoring him and won't explain anything. People are starting to worry. What's going on? The private messages were sharper. From a neighbor. I saw David at the store, he looked awful. He showed me your photos. I'm not trying to pry, but, how did this all happen? From an old coworker. I don't mean to be nosy, but it's all very sudden. Some of us are wondering if you're in some kind of trouble? And finally, from the wife of one of David's friends. I hope you know what you're doing. David hasn't slept in 2 days. Is this really worth ruining your relationship with your only child? That last line stopped me cold. Ruining the relationship, as if I were the one who let it rot. As if I hadn't spent years being sidelined, dismissed, and spoken to like a fragile inconvenience. My phone buzzed again, a new number with a local area code from back home. I stared at it, but didn't answer. Hello? I answered, my tone guarded. Mrs. Prescott, this is Officer Martinez from the local police department. Your son filed a welfare check, he's worried you might be missing or in danger. For a moment, my heart stopped cold. I'm not missing, officer. I'm simply traveling. I understand that, ma'am, he said, gently but firmly. But your son mentioned you haven't been returning his calls. He also pointed to your recent social media posts as signs you might be in a vulnerable position. He's afraid someone may be exploiting you. The sting of humiliation hit hard. My own child had involved the police, not because I was in trouble, but because I was living too well for his comfort. Officer Martinez, I replied, more composed than I felt. I am a 64-year-old woman in full possession of her faculties. I am traveling by choice. I'm not in danger, and no one is taking advantage of me. Whatever my son's intentions may be, his fears are misplaced. Would you consider calling him, ma'am? Just to put his mind at ease? I looked around my sunlit kitchen, the croissants I'd baked from scratch, the elegant view through the windows, the life I had built in mere weeks. Then I thought of David, comfortably seated in his picture-perfect house beside his polished wife, so disturbed by my joy that he involved law enforcement. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Thank you for your concern. After hanging up, I sat motionless for a long time. Mrs. Hoffman found me like that an hour later, still staring out at the lake. Bad news? She asked softly. My son called the police because I didn't return his messages. She raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. Ah. The classic adult-child panic button. Mrs. Ashford went through something similar when she inherited her estate. Her nephew tried to declare her mentally unfit. She'd started traveling, buying art. That unnerved him. And what did she do? She invited him over. Let him see for himself she was more than capable of handling her life. Sometimes the only way to stop the rumors is to let them collide with reality. That evening, I dialed David. He answered instantly. Mom, thank God. Where are you? Are you safe? We've been worried sick. I'm fine, David. I'm in Switzerland. Switzerland? How did you even get there? He sounded both baffled and offended. The police called me today. I filed a welfare check because you vanished. You wouldn't pick up. I closed my eyes, gathering every ounce of calm I had left. You contacted the police because I didn't answer for one day? It wasn't just one day. And it's not just the phone. Mom, you're posting pictures from places that cost thousands per night. Where's this money coming from? I came into an inheritance, I said simply. There was a long pause. I wondered if the call had dropped. An inheritance? From who? You don't have any family left. From an old friend. Someone I knew long before I met your father. His tone sharpened. What friend? You've never mentioned anyone with that kind of money. I could hear Marin in the background, agitated, her voice too muffled to make out, but clearly pressing him. David, I said firmly, I don't owe you a breakdown of my bank statements. This is insane. Last month, you were worried about covering your utility bill. Now you're saying you inherited enough to live like royalty? Do you realize how that sounds? It sounds like my life changed for the better. It sounds like you're being conned, he snapped. Mom, these scammers are professionals. They use fake names, fake accounts, entire websites. They target women like you, lonely, trusting, older. Stop. My voice was quiet. I see. Mom, I'm just trying to protect you. No, David. You're trying to convince yourself that I'm incapable of making my own choices. That happiness, for me, must mean something sinister. That someone like me couldn't possibly be living well without falling prey to a scheme. That's not true. We care about you. We're scared for you. You're scared that I'm not who you assumed I'd always be, the grateful woman in the corner, helping with dishes, ignored in family photos, barely scraping by. You don't want to know I found something better. You want me to return to my tiny apartment, budgeting every dollar, grateful for the bare minimum of attention you throw my way. Mom, please. I'm sending you the address of where I'm staying, I said, the decision already made. You can verify it's real. That I'm safe. That I am exactly where I say I am. But listen to me, David. If you ever involve the police again, if you ever question my mental state one more time, I will cut all contact. Completely. No second chances. After I ended the call, I sent David the villa's address along with Mrs. Hoffman's contact information, should he need additional reassurance. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and strangely empowering. I changed my Facebook privacy settings so that only approved friends could see my posts. I also blocked several people who'd been the most intrusive with their comments. My phone lit up immediately, David again, no doubt shocked by the boundaries I'd drawn. I turned it off without hesitation. Mrs. Hoffman appeared moments later with a glass of wine and a knowing smile. "The first time you enforce boundaries," she said gently, "it feels like you're being heartless. But it's not cruelty. It's self-respect." That night, I slept more peacefully than I had since arriving in Switzerland. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I'd stood firm for myself, without apology, without softening my voice to make others feel more at ease with my choices. By morning, a fresh wave of messages had arrived. But this time, their tone had shifted. It was clear David had shared my address because several people mentioned looking it up online. I googled the place. "It's real, some kind of historic estate." "How on earth did you land there?" I checked the property value. "That villa is worth millions." "What is going on?" But the most revealing message came from Maren herself. "I don't know what game you're playing, but David doesn't deserve this. Disappearing and then threatening to cut him off? You're being selfish. And cruel." I stared at the words for a long while. Selfish. Cruel. For being happy. For refusing mistreatment. For living a life that no longer revolved around pleasing others. I took a screenshot. Not to retaliate, but to remember. To remind myself of the moment when my son's wife showed me exactly who she was, and how threatened she felt by the woman I was becoming. With coffee in hand, I stepped onto the balcony and watched swans glide across the shimmering surface of Lake Geneva. That's when it hit me, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't afraid of their judgment anymore. I no longer craved their approval. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. But freedom, as I was about to learn, came at a cost. David and Maren were not finished trying to reel me back into the smaller, more manageable version of me they were comfortable with. 2 months passed in silence, and I found the quiet oddly healing. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into a life that no longer suited me. Christmas was around the corner, my first one in Switzerland, and my first in decades without the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Mrs. Hoffman had decorated the villa with garlands of pine and delicate white lights that reflected off the lake like stars scattered in the water. The fireplace in the main salon crackled with warmth, and the scent of cinnamon and clove drifted in from her baking. "Will you miss your usual holiday traditions?" she asked one snowy evening as we sat by the fire, she knitting, I thumbing through a book on Swiss history. "I thought I would," I admitted. "But I don't. For too many years, Christmas meant walking on eggshells. Smiling politely. Staying useful. Washing dishes while everyone else sat around chatting. This," I said, gesturing to the peaceful room around us, "feels like the first real Christmas I've had in decades." She gave me a quiet, knowing look. "Mrs. Ashford used to say holidays reveal the truth about relationships. The people who love you want your joy. The rest just want your usefulness." Her words rang in my ears when my phone rang on December 23rd. "David." After a moment of hesitation, I picked up. "Hello, David." "Mom," he said, his voice softer than I'd expected, smaller somehow. "How are you?" "I'm well. And you?" "We're okay. Listen. I wanted to call before Christmas. I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I owe you an apology." I set my book aside. "An apology for what, exactly?" "For calling the police. For assuming you were being taken advantage of. For not trusting that you know your own mind." He paused, searching for the right words. "Maren and I drove by your old apartment last week. Seeing it empty, it hit me. You're really gone." "Yes," I said simply. "I am." I looked up the villa. "It's incredible, Mom. I had no idea you had any kind of connection to something like that." There's a lot you never knew about me, David. A lot I never told you. Why not? About your past? About your family? I stood and walked to the window, watching the snow settle gently onto the villa's sculpted gardens. Because I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I gave up. And I was afraid you'd see your father differently if you knew what I walked away from to be with him. I could never think less of Dad. I believe that now. But I was young when I made those choices. I thought I was protecting you both. There was a long pause on the line. Then, finally, David spoke again, his voice raw. Mom. I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you. I don't even know where to begin. The way I treated you. The way I let Maren treat you. The way I just assumed you'd always be there, no matter how little effort I made. It wasn't right. None of it was right. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, not tears of grief, but something else. Something closer to release. Tears welled up, not from sorrow, but from relief and validation, like a long-hidden weight finally lifted. What made you change your mind? I asked softly. He hesitated before answering honestly. Seeing how you've been living without us, the pictures you post, the confidence in your voice, you're happier without us, aren't you? I could have lied. I could have quickly soothed him, downplayed my joy so he wouldn't feel uneasy. But that would have been the old me, small and cautious, bending myself to comfort others. Yes, I said plainly. I am happier. He exhaled shakily. That's exactly what I feared, and what I needed to hear. David, I don't want you to feel guilty for my happiness. But you must understand, I'm not going back to the way things were. This isn't just a phase or some rebellious act. This is who I am now. I know, he said quietly. And I want to get to know this person, the real you. The one we never let you be. What does Maren think about all this? I asked. There was a long pause. Maren and I have been having some tough conversations. She's not coping well with your changes. She liked having someone to look down on, and now that's gone. I was taken aback by his honesty. And how do you feel about that? I feel like I'm seeing my wife clearly for the first time in our marriage, and I don't like everything I'm seeing. I'm sorry, David. That must be painful. Don't apologize. You didn't cause this, you just stopped enabling it. Maren's treatment of you was always wrong. I just chose to look away because it was easier than confronting her. The truth hung between us, raw and unvarnished. So, where do we go from here? He asked. That depends on what you want and what you're willing to change. I want my mother back, the real one, not the diminished version we created. And I'm ready to do whatever it takes to earn that. Even if it means setting boundaries with your wife. Especially if it means that. That evening, I summoned Klaus into the salon. Klaus, I want to invite my son to visit in the new year. Just him. Can you prepare the guest room and help arrange his travel? Klaus smiled warmly. Of course, madam. It will be good to have family here who appreciate what you've built. Over the next few days, David and I talked often. He showed genuine interest in my life, the villa, the village, my photography. For the first time in years, we had real conversations, not forced, polite exchanges, but true dialogue between two adults who cared. He opened up about his work, the struggles he faced dealing with Maren's increasing demands for control and status, and his regret for the years he wasted trying to please a wife who was never satisfied. I shared about Cordelia, about the choice I made at 19 to marry for love instead of wealth. About the old friend who had remembered me after all those years and given me a second chance at life. I'm proud of you, he said during one call. That might sound strange coming from your son, but I am. I'm ashamed it took losing you for me to see who you really are. Christmas Day was calm and beautiful. Mrs. Hoffman and Klaus joined me for dinner. We exchanged small gifts and shared stories of Christmases long past. I felt no sadness about missing the family gathering that had excluded me for so many years. Instead, I felt grateful for my new life, for friends who had become family, and for the son finally ready to meet his mother as she truly was. David arrived in Switzerland on January 15th, nervous and unsure as Klaus drove him up the winding road to the villa. I watched from the window as he stepped out of the car, standing a moment to take in the ivy-covered stone walls and elegant windows. Then Mrs. Hoffman led him into the salon where I waited. His eyes widened in wonder. "Mom," he said, voice breaking slightly, "this place is incredible." I stood and embraced him. For the first time in years, the hug was genuine from both sides. "Welcome home," I said, and meant it. That week, I showed David everything, the village, the gardens, the views from every window. I introduced him to Henri, who taught him how to make croissants, just as he had taught me. We walked by the lake, and I captured photos of David laughing as he fed the swans. But most importantly, we talked, really talked, about his childhood, our mistakes, and the future we hoped to build together. One evening by the fire, he confided, "I've been thinking about separating from Marin. Not because of you, but because I finally see who she really is, and who I become when I'm with her." "That's a decision only you can make," I said gently. "But I'll tell you this, life is too short to spend with people who make you feel small." "Is that what we did to you? Made you small?" "Yes. But I let you. I chose to shrink instead of fighting for space. That was my mistake." I looked around my beautiful home, the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of the old one, and at the son who was finally ready to see me as I truly was. "Now I take up all the space I need," I said, "and I don't apologize for it." On his last night, wrapped in blankets on the balcony, we watched village lights shimmer on the lake. "This might sound selfish," David said, "but I hope you'll come back to visit sometime, not the old life, just to visit. I want to show people who my mother really is." "I'll think about it," I said. "But David, you must understand, this is my home now. This is where I belong." "I know. And I'm truly happy for you." As Klaus drove him to the airport the next morning, I felt a peace I'd never known. I had reclaimed my relationship with my son, on my own terms. I had drawn boundaries and held firm. I had refused to shrink back into the shape they wanted for me. 3 months later, David called with news. He and Marin were divorcing. She'd raged over my influence on him and demanded he choose between his wife and his mother. "I chose you," he said simply. "Actually, I chose myself. And choosing myself meant choosing you, too." That afternoon, I posted a new photo on Facebook, a sunset over Lake Geneva, the Alps outlined against a golden sky. The caption read simply, "Every ending is a new beginning." The comments were warm and supportive, mostly from those who had come to see my transformation was real and permanent. The harsh voices gradually faded away, blocked or simply retreating once they realized I wasn't returning to the person they could pity or control. But it was David's message that brought the biggest smile to my face. "So proud of my incredible mother. Can't wait to visit again soon." Closing my laptop and settling in for another quiet evening in my beautiful home, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. A harsh phone call from my daughter-in-law, meant to put me back in my place, had instead awakened something inside me I thought was lost forever. I was Eleanor Fairchild again, not the scared 19-year-old who'd sacrificed everything for love, but the woman I had become, confident, independent, unafraid to take up space in the world. Cordelia was right. When she left me that gift, I still had 20 good years ahead, and I intended to live every one of them to the fullest. Outside my windows, Lake Geneva stretched endlessly toward the horizon, mirroring the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. Somewhere across the ocean, there was a Thanksgiving table where my absence had once been insisted upon, where I was told I could wash the dishes if I wanted to join in. But here, in my beautiful home by the lake, surrounded by people who valued me for who I truly am, not what I could do, every day felt like a celebration. I was finally, completely free. Now, I'm curious about you, those who've listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And before you go, on the final screen you'll see 2 more stories, favorites on this channel, that will definitely surprise you. Thank you so much for watching all the way through.